Hi, everyone.
Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks, Matt. How are you?
Fine. Too busy. Crazy.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Yogesh.
Hi, hi.
Hi, Ben. How are you?
Hi, Yogesh.
Hi. Thank you for attending today. So we are still figuring out the sounds. Right? I think you can see me from.
So has anyone actually made it to Mauritius for the meet?
Sorry, we could not get you, Ben. Could you repeat, please?
I was asking if anyone had actually made it to Mauritius for the meeting that wasn't already based there.
I don't think for the database working group we have someone on site so far.
No, it's happening at the office.
Okay.
Yeah, it's happening at the office right now. The event will start on Monday at the hotel. So this is where we'll have rooms and side rooms. This one is like a pure online, and the staff are doing. So we only and then myself at the office. All right, I think we should start. Aaron? All right, Aaron is here. I think we should start. All right, people have not joined.
So, hello everyone. I think we'll just give a couple of minutes for people to join in. I see only 3 attendees on top of the co-host and the co-chairs. So let's start like 5 past 9 UTC, and then we could maybe have more people online.
Yes. All right. Okay. So, as I was telling Frank, Ben, the session will go like this. We reserve 2 hours, so we have ample time. So we'll do some kind of some presentations around 30 minutes, and then there will be question time. So the mode here is webinar style. So people who wish to speak will raise their hands, and then the co-chairs can allow the person to speak from the Zoom panels, the participant panel. And so after the presentations, maybe the question time and the discussions can be, led by yourself and Frank. Would you mind?
Yep, that sounds fine.
So I have made both of you co-chairs, so can do that. And so this meeting is recorded. People have the Q&A option as well. So they can type in their questions in the Q&A section. Maybe some people will use the chat. So, okay. And yeah, so these are the things that are interesting. So, and yeah, one more minute. We have translation as well. Aaron, are you ready?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Don't forget to put your video on when you speak. All right, so maybe we should start now. All right, so good morning and good afternoon to everyone who have joined recently. thank you very much for attending our database working group session. So I'm Yogesh Chadee. I'm the head of value-added services at AFRINIC. And we have in our midst a few more staff who will do presentations today. We have Keessun Fokeerah, who is the head of registry. We have Aaron Majambo and Mukasa, who are software developers. We have two co-chairs who are not staff. We have Ben Madison and Frank Habich, who will be helping us during the session today. So thank you everyone for your attendance, help and participation. So for those who are new to the working group and who have not joined us on the mailing list, please, I would invite you to join the mailing list. So how do you join the mailing list? You just browse to lists.afrinic.net and follow the link for the database working group, and you will get the instructions to subscribe to the mailing list. So for this session, noteworthy that we do have translation in the Zoom session in French, English, and Arabic. Please choose the channel that you're more comfortable with. You can follow the session better. There are questions, Q&A, where you can type your questions during the presentation, but we will take all the questions at the end of the presentation. Then we will have an open mic where you actually have to raise your hand so that you get the microphone for you to speak, where we'll have discussions. Right. So for us to write the minutes and publish them, we are actually recording this session. So please be aware of that. So what is the flow of the session? So we will start with some presentations by the staff members, and then our two co-chairs, as I mentioned before, Ben Madison and Frank Habich, will take over. The co-chair of the database working group will take over for the question time by the audience, and followed by discussions on key topics for the working group. So without delaying much, I would like to start the presentations. Yes?
So just before we move on to the presentation, it occurs to me that I don't believe we have actually adopted the minutes from September 2020.
Oh yes, that's true.
They've been published for some time, but maybe we should do that before we move on.
All right, so I don't really know how it works, but maybe you can lead that part, please.
So who do we have here that's not either me or Frank or a member of staff?
I think we don't have anyone else. We don't have anyone else actually so far. We have around, I think, 20 people who registered, but they have not connected yet.
I think for the attendees part, I see there's Angela, Kimba, Patrick, and Vinaya. So,
yes, all right. Yes.
then there's Cedric, who is staff, but there are 4 people online right now.
Should we allow them to talk?
There we go.
Yes, I think I've given them power to speak.
Yeah, so you can just unmute yourself if you want to intervene.
Great. So if anyone was present at the September 2020 meeting and has read the minutes that were published after that, if you could speak up and let us know if anyone would like to propose adopting them. Okay, I assume that everybody wasn't present or hasn't read them, or both. So I think we're going to struggle to proceed with this. Let's maybe come back to this at the end in that case, if we've got any additional attendees joining. But I don't think that we can adopt them otherwise.
All right, sure. So let us proceed then. All right, so I will give a brief overview of the status of work items, followed by Edwards Mukasa, who will talk a little bit about RPKI. Then Keessun Fokeerah will give some news about MyAFRINIC V2. Aaron Majambo will talk a little bit about some upcoming RDAP enhancements and a little bit about the WHOIS as well. Okay. So status of work items. So we were to create a release cycle for forthcoming features. So I would like to thank Ben Madison for creating the GitHub for the database working group, where we have repositories now where we can put all the work items. We have a template repository for work items as well, which we can copy and reuse. We also have the meeting minutes there as well. And and we also have a tool to do some quality assurance tests on documents that the working group can write. So thank you very much for that. That was completed on the 17th of March, 2021. We had a task to create a business rule on WHOIS, a new business rule for maintainer objects. So the name of maintainer objects are to always end with -MNT. And the business rule was deployed on 8th July 2021. Then we had also decided to remove domain objects which are in the WHOIS database, all those domain objects which end with a trailing dot. So that action was taken on the 16th November 2020. Then the fourth one is we want to delete all unreferenced child objects. So what we did is we create a schedule task which deletes all unreferenced objects which are 90 days old or more. But we have limited it to four object types only: IRT, maintainer, organization, and cert so far. So that was done on 16th December 2020. Now, these four work items are still ongoing or pending. So we had to look at the email addresses of all resource holders and ensure that at least one email address is recorded in the database. So the exercise was completed for members in 2021. For legacy resource holders, this exercise is ongoing and we have not completed that yet. Second item here is we want to make the changed attribute of all WHOIS objects more reliable. We have found that there is an issue with the reliability of that attribute data. And this, we said, requires consensus from the working group, basically whether we want to do it and how we want to achieve it as well. The third one is we wanted to limit domain objects to the minimum allocation size. And this also requires consensus from the working group. And the fourth one is we want to rewrite the WHOIS manual, make it more user-friendly and update it so that it reflects the current features on WHOIS as well. So this item is pending. Okay, so I would like now to invite my colleague Edwards to talk a little bit about RPKI.
Well, thank you so much, Yogesh. My name is Edwards, software engineer. So I'm here today to walk you through some of the work that we are working on in the upcoming upgrade for RPKI. This work is divided into three main categories. So these categories, we have the enhancements, then we have the part for the API, and then we also have the part for the user interface. So here, what we're trying to do with this work is to make sure that we improve the overall user experience for our members who are using the RPKI service. This is in line with our strategic objective of making sure that we delight our customers. So I'll start with the first part of the work, which is the enhancements. So in the enhancements, one of the things that we are looking at, what we are working on, is the support for delegation mode. So this will enable members who are large enterprises to make sure that they manage their ROAS much more efficiently. Because for the big guys, for large enterprises, the most efficient way is to make sure that they are managing all this creation of ROAS, activating of engine within their infrastructure. So we are making sure that we are adding this in the upcoming release of our RPKI. Second, we also are looking at adding features for auto renewal of ROAS. This has been asked by most members that they would prefer that ROAS to be auto renewed at the end of their expiry. Reason being that sometimes members forget to renew their ROAS, and then they just find out that ROAS expired, which cause disruption in their services. So we are adding this feature such that we prevent this happening. And then I think this will also improve their user experience. Then also another part and enhancement that we are working on to add is the support for notification, to make sure that members get timely information from the system regarding their RPKI objects. For example, towards the end of the expire of any side object, the system will be able to send a notification, an email to people who are responsible, to let them know that a particular signed object is about to expire. Please come and do something about it. And also, in case this has taken over to auto renew, if it was instructed to do so, then the system also will be able to send a notification to the members that your signed object has been renewed, so that there's that flow of information from the system to the members. Second is the API. So we also got a request from some of the members that they prefer us to add an API layer to our service to enable them perform certification operations via the API, like activation of the engine, refreshing the engine, creation and revocation of ROAS. So this is more of enabling members to be able to automate the whole process, either by integrating this into their existing systems, such that it also makes things much more easier for them by integrating this into their underlying systems. Last is the user interface. So also what we're working on is to make sure that we are improving the look and feel and then the workflow of our service when people are interacting with our RPKI in MyAFRINIC, to make sure that we are looking at making it much more user-friendly and more intuitive. So we are giving a facelift to all these section for certification in MyAFRINIC. So in conclusion, those are the three main categories of the work in the upcoming RPKI upgrade, the enhancements, and then the security for API, and then the look and feel. So I think that's what I had to give you an update on what we're working on. I think now I'll take the opportunity to hand over to my colleague, Keessun, to give you an update on MyAFRINIC View 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edward. So I'll be walking you through some of the developments that has happened for MyAFRINIC V2. The main components that we are focusing on with the version 2 of MyAFRINIC is improving the workflow. So in terms of how you're tracking your tickets and having an overview of how your resource requests are moving forward, but also making sure that you're managing your child objects more easily. So there are the parts of bulk updates and changes that you could do on your child objects that are being simplified. And in terms of security, we are, of course, planning on having the 2FA for your account, but also for the updates on your child objects to use the maintainer passwords and ensure that anyone who has access to your account doesn't just go in and make changes, but they have to have that extra layer of having the maintainer password in order to make any changes to your child objects. And we are also simplifying the way of having compliance checks done for members. So this is in line with the policy proposal for the policy dashboard. So even without that policy proposal, we had already started to work on a couple of checks. So a first version will come with the release, where we'll be able to give an overview to our members based on their account if there are any policy breach or best practices that we will be proposing to them. So for example, if you have your V4, V6 and they are not covered by a root object, we'll be warning you about them and giving you some details on that. So recently we did have some challenges that have slowed us a bit on the development side. But I can say that since the last 2 weeks, we are back in cruising speed and we are moving forward with the developments. So these are a bit on some screenshots or snippets on how it will look like. So the visuals have changed and even the child objects part you will see has improved. And on the right-hand side, you will see the billing part and the actual pop-ups for when you're logging into your account, the warnings and all the different issues that are linked to the member's account. So we have already launched the release candidate since December last year, and you can already access it to the link that you see on the screen. And we are working towards the full go live in Q3 of 2022. So in case you want to give us any feedback on how you are finding it, or if there's anything that you would like to improve, of course, you can tell us about it. And what Edward was talking also about the RPKI GUI interface, so all of this will be bundled together with the V2 upgrade, and the RPKI side as well will be more streamlined with the V2 launch. So thank you very much on that, and I'll give the floor to Aaron for the next part of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Keessun. Thank you, Keessun. I'm Aaron Majambo. I'm a software engineer at the VS team at AFRINIC. So I'm going to talk about LDAP enhancement and WHOIS API. The first point we are going to talk about is how to achieve NRO profile conformance This is to align LDAP conformance with other registries. We have 12 points that we need to achieve. We need to implement to achieve that conformance. During this period, we are about to achieve all of those 12 points. We are about achieving 10 points, 10 work items. Then we'll be able to go to upgrade this feature live by July 2022. I would like to emphasize on this that these conformance is about resources that someone's user queries from LDAP server. So we flag some resources based on the status, based on the administrative status, and based on the resource type. And we have LDAP conformance that goes with that type of resource. Apart from achieving NRO profile conformance, we have new features that we need to implement in order to give a new life to LDAP on our site. The first is to implement GS Contact, which is an implementation of GS card extension with a JSON contact representation as an alternative to vCard. During this period, we'll be transitioning from GCard to GS Contact card, as described in the draft of ITF that is mentioned here in the slide. We'll also be able to convert vCard to GS Contact cards or card group and vice versa. During this phase, we are going to be deprecating GCard and to replace it by GS Contact progressively. The next new feature that we are featuring here is LDAP reduction. During this phase that we are implementing right now, we're able to identify redacted response fields and their implementation, whether by JSON path-based removal or empty value methods. What is to be known here is that reduction will allow us to serve users with data according to their privileges. An anonymous user would get no data at all, or some data depend upon the resource he's asking for. Whereas someone who an authenticated user will get access to some fields, more additional fields, depending upon the access right that he has. The third point is OpenID Connect authentication. For this, we are going to do integration with OpenID Connect identity provider. We have identified Keycloak as the potential identity provider that we are going to integrate with our LDAP server. Thus, we are going to be able to perform authentication, authorization with JSON Web Tokens and BRR tokens. Users will be assigned roles with specific access grant, and thus we can leverage credential issuers and federation membership with other registries. These features will be available by September 2022. The next features that will be achieved next year are a reverse search, where we have a search by entity properties. For example, we can search domain by a registrant. And we have also partial responses that allow a user to ask for a server predefined set of fields in the response. The last feature to be implemented will be paging and sorting of such results. Those features will be implemented next year, and we need to have consensus on how to implement these. So on the WHOIS side, we are pleased to announce the work done on WHOIS API. The main point is to expose secure WHOIS API to end users. By that point, mean using RESTful web services to perform WHOIS query, which will allow users to retrieve and parse WHOIS data in JSON format. We have also been able to implement a gateway, thus being able to expose the WHOIS API behind the gateway. When we expose WHOIS API behind the gateway, we'll be able to front the gateway in order to be able to protect the API and use, for example, a rate limiter as a facade to WHOIS API. All these features have been implemented and are going to go live by end of July 2022. Thank you. So now I would like to make a small demo about the new features and WHOIS APIs. So the first thing is I would like to emphasize the changes that are going to happen to LDAP. If we do the request to the live LDAP that is still there, is on AFRINIC, we are going to see that we have LDAP conformance here. We have 3 levels of conformance. And then the LDAP conformance asks us to add a level of conformance. So we have implemented a new level of conformance that we have added 2 other levels here to LDAP. We have JS card, which is now is going to be part of the responses that we are going to give to end users, and we have NRO LDAP profile SN flat 0. So we have a GS card entity. When we query for this entity, for example, the new thing that is going to happen is that we are going to add a query parameter that is going to specify whether we want the old way, the cards or a GS card property. So if I add a GS card property, you see that we are going to see entities here. They are going to be represented as GS card type. And if I remove these query parameters, we are going to switch back. So you see there is no longer GS card here in the LDAP conformance. And if we go, we try to browse in the results, we are going to see that we are going to get a vcard array object, which is the old way of doing things. So I'm going to put it back. So now we see that now the conformance is going back to be to GS card 0. And apart from this, I've talked about LDAP conformance. We have to flag some resources. For example, this is a reserved IP address that is used for some special purposes. So if I query for this object, so I will be able to see that the status, it has a status. It has a reserved status. This will be a resource that is reserved. But if I go back to the other one, this is 81 .00./8. This is AFRINIC pool resource for IPv4. Now, this is a resource that has been allocated to AFRINIC by IANA. So this will be flagged in a certain way as an administrative resource. This is to achieve the level of conformance. So another thing that is new is now we can be querying the resource through a gateway and get the result. And that's as I can demonstrate here. Let me demonstrate here. I can send. I can query for WHOIS resource through the gateway, because this is the port for the gateway, and then I can see. I can see if we can apply the rate limiting pattern to the server, so that we can get some responses can be blocked based on like we have gone far in the number of requests that we have sent. So here I've sent 200 requests and 200 concurrent requests. So you see that here, if you can, here you can see that I had a concurrence level. I have sent 200 requests at once. Then the rate limiter was able to filter and allow only 6 requests to go through and 194 requests to fail. This is what we've been able to achieve and are going to deploy if we reach consensus. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. So that was the end of our demo today. Thank you very much, everyone. So I would like now to pass on the hand to our database working group co-chairs. Maybe we can handle the questions from the audience.
Yes, okay. Should we start with a microphone test for Ben?
Yeah, is this any better?
Yes.
Excellent. Gotta love Pulse Audio, right?
So are there any questions from any participants about the presentations first, maybe?
So on the Q&A, we do not see any questions so far. So the attendees have been given speaking rights. If you would like to ask a question, you can just unmute yourself and intervene.
So I have a long list of questions, but I'll give others an opportunity first.
I think my list is shorter than Ben's. But also, yeah, asking others to step forward if they want to, if there's anything.
Okay, maybe I'll start with my list. Maybe it will serve as inspiration to others.
Go ahead.
So Joshua is asking if there'll be access to the presentations after the fact. Yogesh and team, are you able to? I think probably the best way of doing that is for us to upload it onto the GitHub repo where we're going to be doing the minutes. So if you could provide them to me after the meeting, I can upload them there, and then share links on the mailing list.
Yes, we will also, yes, we will have the minutes in the repo, and we will also upload the presentation on the AIS website, Internet Summit Africa website, where the agenda is. We will post the slides there as well. So it is internetsummitafrica.org. org.
I'll be pasting the link on the chat, but the presentation will be uploaded in a couple of minutes after we end the session. So we'll just give you a heads up as soon as it's done.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let me start with my list. So starting with the RPKI stuff, I'm very glad to hear that you guys are making a start with delegated mode. I've been asking that for a very long time, but I think I'm the only person asking still. So it's nice to see that my wish is being granted finally. Are you also looking at supporting publishing parent at the same time?
So I did not actually understand the question. Are you talking about hosted delegated mode or?
So, okay, so it's sometimes referred to as the hybrid mode, where the CA is delegated and operated by the LIR, but the publication point of the parent is used for publication of the object.
All right.
And
yes.
there are a whole bunch of advantages of doing that. So my suggestion would be to try and do that in one go, because I think that a lot of people who are, certainly speaking for myself, the reason that I would want to use delegated mode is so that I'm in control of my own key material and I'm able to do my own object issuance. I really don't want to have the hassle of operating a publication point. And that's, I was at the RIDE meeting last week. They've just announced that they are going to be supporting the hybrid mode in their next release. Aaron already supports it or is about to release support for it. AFRINIC has supported it for a long time. And so for consistency across the ecosystem, it would be a good thing. And most people I've spoken to who are already doing delegated mode in one of those regions has indicated that they would want to use publishing parent. It's got a whole bunch of benefits.
All right. Thank you very much for this input. So yes, we have heard from the other RILs about what we initially were told was hosted delegated mode. Yes, hybrid mode. So thank you for the input. We had not heard from our community yet on this feature request. So now that it's done, we will look into it. We did not envisage to do it this year. It's not on the activity plan for this year. So I think I will put it for next year's activity plan. It's all right.
Sure. I mean, I personally think that the vast majority of people who would use a delegated mode would actually prefer a publishing parent model if it were available. So I think having a delegated, I think that splitting them into two items is going to create more work for people, because people will begin using the delegated mode because they need to be in control of their own key material. And that will require them to go through all of the time and effort to set up a publication infrastructure, only for them to then stop using it when publishing parent is finally made available.
All right.
I would skip the intermediate step. The reason that it was done in two steps in most of the other regions is because the publishing parent model was actually defined rather a lot later than the delegated model. The up-down protocol didn't support it previously properly, which is why there was that kind of that time delay. I think given that we're playing catch up in this region, doing both at the same time is the way forward.
All right, thank you. So I take note of that. So let's see how we can do that. Yeah, thank you.
So I hope AFRINIC staff team can sit on considering incorporating this new requirement into the existing project. And even if the project will take a month longer, maybe it will be worth it. And maybe you can come back to us after a week or two, if it's possible to integrate it into this project.
All right, so we will analyze this and get back to the group. In a couple of weeks.
Perfect. So if it would be helpful, I know of a number of developers that are actively working on publish and parent implementations for other in other parts of the ecosystem. So the Tim, who is the author of Krill, is busy doing it for Krill at the moment. Also, Tees from RIPE is busy working on their implementation again at the moment. So there are plenty of people who are actively working on this problem that I can put you in touch with to kind of pick their brains if that would be helpful.
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Okay, there still doesn't seem to be anyone else in the queue, so I'll move on to my next one. On ROA auto renewal, I'm very skeptical about this feature. I think that unless there is some check on the automatic rollover, we end up with stale data in the RPKI in a few years from now, just like we have in the IRR. And I think that we need to avoid that at all costs. One of the benefits of RPKI objects is that they expire. You don't have to go and clean them up. And if we do, if we turn on auto rollover, then we remove that feature. Have you thought about ways that can be, that we can get kind of a best of both worlds, where where we're not storing up a massive cleanup job for ourselves in a few years from now, but we can remove some of the admin burden, possibly by there being some sort of a pre-notification, but there needs to be some sort of active act on the part of end users in order to create the rollover ROA or something of that nature. I'm just concerned that we defeat the effectiveness of the RPKI in a few years from now if we allow objects to go stale in perpetuity.
Right, thank you. I think this is worth noting. There are different preferences from different network operators. Some network operators would like it to be automated, so it's less work. And of course, as you said, if it's not monitored properly, it generates a lot of junk. So yes, maybe we can have a short discussion on the mailing list and see what's the preference, or how can we get the best of both worlds. What I think we can play for now is whether we put, when someone is creating the ROA, whether it is already ticked that this will be auto renewed, or it is not ticked that this will be auto renewed and the person has to tick it. That's the one thing we can play on, whether we put it on by default or not. We haven't thought more than that. So maybe a discussion on the mailing list, we can generate some ideas.
Yeah, that's true. But before we send it to the mailing list, I would like to add, yeah, it's really a very valid concern. And two things. First of all, don't take it for granted that we now here, the group, condoning putting a tick there, auto renew by default. Never ever. And maybe not even putting the possibility there for them to auto renew, because that is still to be discussed. And as a default, after what Ben has said, I think we should default to be careful in terms of garbage that will linger on forever. So don't if nothing happens, don't default to implement it, and especially not enabling it. There
Yeah,
should
I
be
agree.
some feedback from us first.
So Patrick has made an important observation in the chat, which is that in the web PKI world, services like Let's Encrypt have the ability to kind of automate renewal by just kind of sticking a job in a crumb. And I think that's kind of what we want to be going for here. We want there to be some easy to automate action on the part of the network operator, so that they don't have to sit there and click their way through the GUI once a year. But we don't also allow silence to mean keep this garbage around forever. There needs to be some machine or some user sitting there somewhere saying, yes, this is still good, which is what the ACME protocol does quite well. The thing that's not obvious is what that signal should be. So that maybe that's the question that we need to be asking on the mailing list.
Well, if there's an API, it can be put into the cron job, and that would be an active action on the.
Yeah, sure.
But
Look, once we've got the delegated model, you can literally just use cron job, right? Run your own CA if you want to.
Yeah. But also, I think for those who like the mouse more, if we have notification emails, to put a link there into the notification email that authenticates and gets the job done as well, it's another option that we should support.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that leads me quite nicely onto my next question, which is, are there any plans to support the GBR object?
What was the question? Enhance support for?
Is there any plans to support the GBR object, the Ghostbuster record?
Master record.
Ghostbuster record. It is RFC 6493. It is essentially an RPKI. It's essentially a limited V card, which is wrapped in a RPKI signed object. And it was published as an RFC in February 2012. So support for this is quite a long way overdue.
Okay, so yeah, true. So I think we'll have to look into this one, and we'll get back to the group after that. Yes.
So the reason that I think that this is particularly important, given your list of work items, is there's a difference between in most contexts, there's a difference between the person who is responsible for routing policy versus the person that is responsible for RPKI management, and that's across multiple organizations. It's not obvious which contact should be used to send out RPKI related notifications. In large operators, the team that's managing the relationship with AFRINIC for allocations and stuff is not necessarily the person that's looking after the RPKI deployment. And a Ghostbusters record is there specifically so that you know who the authoritative contact is for administrative issues related to a CA.
So Ben, in a quick view on the RSC, will it be something a bit similar to the zone contact that we have on reverse DNS, for example? Like if someone would like to reach out to the team or the person who is managing the specific zone, so who is that person? It's not like the typical admin or tech counter, but it's
So
an
it's, it's subtly different to both of those things. It's about who is managing the CA rather than who is actually creating the data that the CA signs. Do you see what I mean? So imagine imagine that there was a DNS record that gave the contact person for the actual operator of the DNS server.
Yeah.
It's more like that sort of thing rather than being specific to a particular zone that's hosted on that server.
Okay, okay, I see. It's like the person who is looking after the infrastructure, the CA itself, instead of the actual records inside it.
Exactly. It's somewhere to send an email that says like you haven't reissued your CRL in 3 days and it's gone stale, or your serial numbers have wrapped and as a result my RP is crashing. It's for that kind of communication rather than oh, your BGP announcement is invalid because of this rower.
Okay, I think we'll just have to go through that RFC and internally, then we come back to the mailing list.
Yep.
And then we can also look at how to best incorporate it into the different.
It's a very, very simple RFC. It's almost too simple because there are some details that were omitted because the author thought that it was obvious and it's not actually obvious. I've implemented the RFC before and so I know where the bodies are buried, so feel free to reach out to me. But it is a very, very simple, it's a very, very simple object. It's basically a version 4B card wrapped in a signed object. So the actual implementation work should be tiny.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for offering help on that as well.
You're welcome. And my final RPKI related one is, have there been any internal discussions about supporting key certs for BGP-SEC?
Frankly speaking, I don't think so. It has not been a subject that is currently being actively discussed right now.
So how useful would that be?
That depends on your point of view. Today, there is no production ready running code that allows you to actually use BGP-SEC out on the internet. But there are a number of proof of concept implementations, and there are a number of people actively working on investigating what actually deploying BGP-SEC out on the open internet would look like. All of that is made extremely difficult if it's not possible to create a valid key cert for the routers. And so, and this is a conversation that's been coming up in the context of Aaron and Wright discussions. It's important that people who are looking at the technology and evaluating whether or not it is actually deployable are able to create these kinds of objects, even if it's just for experimentation purposes. It's also important, I personally believe it's also important that when the relevant working groups in the IETF have finalized an object, that those objects are implemented by the RIRs and they don't wait around for their users to come asking for it, because it becomes a chicken and egg problem. If the objects can't be created, then no one is playing with it. If no one is playing with it, then they're not finding any bugs. And if they're not finding any bugs, if and when it does end up getting rolled out at a large scale, it ends up breaking things. Again, I think this is another example, and I'm not pointing the finger at AFRINIC here. None of the RIRs have support for creating key certs yet. But I think that this is I think this kind of trend of waiting around for LIRs to come along and ask for things, rather than simply getting on with implementing things, as soon as they're finalized in the standards process, is the wrong way around, because it delays deployment. A good example of when this has happened recently was Job Schneider's, who a lot of you probably know, created and published a key cert for the first time in a public RPKI repository, and it triggered a segmentation fault in the fork validator. And the fork validator, every instance in the world simultaneously crashed. And that stuff would get caught during the development cycle if there was a way of actually creating these objects and we had them published in the RPKI ahead of time.
Yep. Thanks, Ben, for bringing it up. I think people will agree we should add it as a workgroup item, as a work item, and maybe not connected to others, keep it as a separate project. And then also, I don't know, Ben, what you think about the prioritizing after the Ghostbusters, right?
Yes, I think so.
So
I think that from a prioritization perspective, the most important thing here is getting the delegated and hybrid modes working. Because members in other regions already have the ability to create these types of slightly more unusual objects because they can simply run their CA and create them themselves. In this region, we can't do that. The reason that I haven't been able to play with any of these objects on the issuance side is because I can't delegate my CA at the moment. So I think focusing on that unlocks a whole bunch of things, and then we should shift focus to kind of adding features to the hosted CA after that. That would be my personal suggestion.
Agreed.
And maybe for the experimentation or like the BGP for the key cert port that you were mentioning, something that we could try to do is also have like a collaborative session where we could see what is the exact expectation that you would have on the behavior, and then we can try and like understand fully the type of objects that you would like to create, and then we can take it back internally to see how to make it happen.
Yep, absolutely.
Because, there would be like an interpretation part if we just do it on our own, but it's better to work together on this one to fully understand what is the expectation on your side, and we try and match that.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. So I think also a version of that is, but a more kind of general process question is there any formal, is there anyone on the team that's working on RPKI related stuff that is actively participating in CyderOps at the moment? Because Amrish was kind of doing that job previously, but he's obviously not around anymore, and that doesn't seem that role doesn't seem to have been filled.
Yes, it's true. It's true that we are not actively participating in CyderOps at the moment, and we should start doing that. Yeah, shortly. So the value-added services team, so my team actually is taking over the RPKI service. So we would do that, but AFRINIC still doesn't have the research team for research work. So we would probably be involved in that until the research department is set up and can take up the research part.
Yeah, and in any event, I think that the team that's actually doing the implementation work is the one that should be the most closely involved anyway. It's great having researchers there, but ultimately it needs to be the people actually writing the code, because that, you know, whether or not something is a good spec is determined by whether someone could actually sit down and write the code for it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, once you've kind of worked out internally who that person should be, I'm more than happy to do a kind of a to you know, try and make introductions and help whoever it is find their way kind of around the processes and the personalities, and help with orientation.
All right. Very much. We'll discuss internally. Right now, we only have 3 people in the team. We have 2 developers, which are Edwards and Aaron, and myself as the head. So we'll discuss internally. I have a fair idea who it's going to be, but give the chance to everyone. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Yogesh. Okay, that's the end of my RPKI related list. Does anyone else want to chime in before I carry on? Because I feel like I'm doing rather a lot of talking here.
I think at some point I saw Guy Gebsi, who had his. Sorry, I was using the wrong mic. So at some point I saw Guy Gebsi had his mic unmuted. So Guy, would you like to intervene, or? Yeah, I see you unmuted. So Guy, please carry on. Cannot hear Guy. Guy, we see that you're unmuted, but unfortunately we cannot hear you.
Maybe we should say, even if it's another language, French, Arabic, you can feel free to speak up.
Unfortunately, I've switched back to the different channels as well. I don't hear Guy on this, on any of the channels. No, Guy, I see your chat, so we are unable to hear you.
You can type the question if there's no way for audio. Yeah, could be the earphones. So maybe to continue with a little break for Ben. Yes.
Do you hear me now?
Almost, very, very low voice.
It's not better?
It's still very quiet. We can just about hear you now.
Maybe I have a small problem with my earphones. I don't know.
Oh, that's much better. Now you're loud and clear.
Okay. Hello, everyone. For me, I just joined the session with a big delay. So I've not heard what you have already discussed on, but I think I've lost many things. For me, it's my first time to join this session. It's my first time to join the African for me. So I hope I will have more information about best practice that can help me to perform daily in my daily activities. As you can see in my profile, I am IP engineer working in a telecom operator, Orange in Cameroon. So in my daily activities, I have now to deal with the IP challenges on the IP plan, IPv4, IPv6, and migration of from IPv4 to IPv6, and managing also the internet outlets, including the DNS environment, including also the IP backbone, with IP transmission. So I work on IP backbone, IP transmission, and I work also on the internet provider with dealing with peers, like in Cameroon, we deal especially with Camtel. So as I see, for me, I think it's important for me to participate in such meeting or such sessions. So as I said, it's my first time, so I am here to learn. I am here to see how the things must be done, or how the things are done.
Yes, welcome.
Welcome.
It's good to have you here, and our colleague Yogesh is showing on the slides now the address of the website where you can subscribe to the mailing list if you're not already there. And then we are also going to attend to your questions if you have any on email on the mailing list. We're not just active once a year, so we can interact a lot using email mailing lists. But thanks for coming, for joining.
Okay, so you, if I understand very well, you said this link and this IP, this email address, I can send a question if I have, right?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Open to everyone.
For the link for the https list.afrinic.net is to register.
Yes, to subscribe to the mailing list.
Okay.
And afterwards, you will get a welcome message, and afterwards you can just post emails to this email address that's at the bottom. Okay, so me talking about work items and discussions.
Could you
Yes.
come again, please?
Sorry?
On the
You go to this web page, the list
And
info.
click here. Click here.
Yeah, so as soon as you go on that link, you basically just need to fill in your email, your name, and as soon as you hit subscribe, you should get a welcome message, like Frank was saying. So then you will be able to participate, to see the discussions, and ask your questions, of course.
The other way around. Top is email address, bottom name. Okay.
okay.
Thank you, Guy, for participating.
Yes, thank you, Guy. So to continue with the work items that were presented in the beginning of the session by Yogesh, we've noted that there were some that were kind of still hanging and needing consensus about the domain objects with to fit in the minimum allocation size, and the other question about the stricter rules for the changed attribute. So we'll have to take this to the mailing list and put some deadlines and require to comments. Otherwise, we'll have to go ahead by default for that one. So can we maybe put on the mailing list a deadline of 2 weeks from now? Maybe will somebody from staff be available to put it as a question, like exactly what needs to be changed, what needs to be approved? And for both of them, I think the discussion was leaning towards going ahead because it's quite obvious things and problems. So if there are no further comments, we will go ahead, but we'll give everybody on the mailing list the deadline, I believe. Yogesh, can there be a summary of the changes to be proposed, to be done?
Definitely. So for these 2 items, we will write the problem description and we will share with the 2 co-chairs, and once it's all right, we can share with the rest of the list. It's okay?
Yeah. Or we
That's fine. Certainly for the domain object size one, I think we had a fairly clearly defined proposal that is ready to, ready for us to call consensus on. I'm just having a look through the minutes of our last meeting. I think that there was still kind of various options being discussed around what we do about the changed attribute. No, actually, we did make a fair amount of progress. Yeah, so Yogesh, maybe just have a look at the minutes from the 2020 meeting, because that's fair. What we discussed is fairly well documented there.
All right.
And maybe try and formalize that into a concrete implementation proposal, and send that to the list to get comments on.
All right.
I agree with Frank. Plenty time has passed since we last discussed that. I think it's time to move forward.
All right. All right. I'll do that. Thank you.
So one question that I wanted to ask in terms of the RDAP, there was a good feature of the rate limiting being done. That doesn't apply to the WHOIS, right? No, WHOIS has its own already, right? In terms of
Frank, you mean plain text via port 43, right? The regular WHOIS interface.
Yes.
Yeah, I had the same question.
So what was the question again?
Is there a rate limiting for the WHOIS service TCP port 43? The public WHOIS online service, non-web-based.
The rate limiting that was described, is it my understanding, and I think Frank's understanding by the sounds of it, was that the rate limiting is applied to the REST API wrapper that you've written around the WHOIS interface, but it doesn't apply to the plain text port 43 interface. Is that correct? Or does it apply in both places?
So we were planning to apply it on the API side because the port 43 already has a rate limiter. But we can override it as well. It depends. We'll see which one works better. I think the port 43 one is already secure. So this one is best applied to the new APIs that we are developing.
Yep, I agree.
Now, what we showed is we showed two APIs. One is for RDAP, and one is a WHOIS API itself for querying, an API, not on port 43. So both of these APIs would be behind the gateway.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the rate limiter will also apply to RDAP, is what you're saying, right?
Exactly, RDAP and the WHOIS API.
Yep.
Exactly as you understood it, yeah. But port 43 has its own rate limiter.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense.
That's good. We put this in the minutes and then this item is closed.
Have you documented the mapping for the JSON representation of the WHOIS data anywhere? Because there's lots of different ways that you could represent that data, and having that written down somewhere is going to be, you know, pretty important.
So we intend to add open API to these REST endpoints so that we add technical specification using open API or Swagger.
Okay, but does that specification actually describe how the mapping from the RPSL style representation to the JSON representation works? Because I can think of multiple ways that you could represent that data in JSON.
Yeah, I think for that point, we need a consensus. We need to have a consensus, but it is something that can be worked on. I think we are going to wait for the recommendation of this working group on how to proceed. So
I would suggest doing it the other way around, actually, because there's probably nothing wrong with the way that you've done it. The issue is that there's just multiple ways of doing the same thing, and for that API to be useful, people need to know how that mapping works. So if you could document how that mapping is actually designed today, and maybe put that on the mailing list so that people can provide their feedback if anything does need to change. My concern is that it, you know, that is documented and people can find it, not that it's done, you know, one way or the other.
That's true. Very good point. So whatever we have right now, we will just post it to the mailing list as a document.
Right. Thank you.
Then afterwards, we'll probably ask to put it online as well, permanently.
Hello?
Yes, Guy?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, I want to know how can I manage to register automatically our customer on AFRINIC portal. I explain my point. We have customer that have our IP addresses, our public IP addresses. We allocate some IP public IP address to our customer, especially corporate B2B things like that organization, and it's you have many customers like that in the B2B sector, and normally on AFRINIC portal we need to register each of these customer with the IP subnet that have been allocated to them. And I noticed that to do that, I need to register customer per customer. It's quite fastidious. So I will want to know if there is an possibility to maybe have an Excel file shape in a specific format, and that I can upload automatically, and register all the customer register. I don't know if you get my point very well.
Yes.
Yes, E. So concerning that question, the registering of the assignments, I believe, is what you're trying to point to. So the registering of the assignments, there are three ways that you can do it mainly. There is the first one where you do it via MyAFRINIC, like you mentioned, where you have to do it one by one. But there's also the two other options where you can do bulk adds or updates. So you can use the email method. There is an email address to which you can send all the objects that you would like to create. In there is a need to use your maintainer password, or if you have your PGP key already stored into a Keessun, which is linked to your maintainer, you can also just sign that email and send it, and the creation or the updates will be done automatically. There are some companies in our region that we have recently learned about where they don't really have a policy to use PGP at a corporate level on emails. So you can also do that via creating like a PGP key on your local machine, and you can do the bulk WHOIS update via our web portal. There's a plain text update that you can use on whois.afrinic.net. So in there, you'll be able to just paste either the updates or the creation using your maintainer password, or the sign object with your PGP, which is linked to your maintainer, and just paste it there. So yeah, like Yogesh is showing you, you can still do it here one by one, or you can just go on the plain text update at the top. So in here, you can just paste all the details in the area video. In case it's not too clear, I believe that we are just talking about it. It might not be really helpful or easy to do it right now. What we can do is we could relate you to the learn.afrinic.net for some materials, or simply I'm pasting an address down here. If you contact the hostmasters, they would basically just help you through the process and handhold you on how you can build up the OPSL objects and do the creation as well. So don't worry about that. There are ways where you can make it much simpler, but we can of course help you with that to make the changes and the updates. So you don't have to do it one by one through MyAFRINIC only. Is that okay, Guy?
Okay. So what I've understood is that I can send a mail to hostmaster.afrinic.net, and I will have support there.
Yes. So in case you would like to, how do you call it, experiment on your own, is where you can use the whois.afrinic.net if you're already well versed with OPSL. But of course, if it's all new to you, do not hesitate to reach out to the hostmasters on the email address hostmaster@afrinic.net, and we'll have a pleasure to help you with that.
Okay. So with my Excel file that have all the customer with all the IP subnet allocated to them, I can
yes, exactly.
Use the file to automatically register.
Yes, exactly. You'll be able to do it in bulk instead of doing it one by one.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy.
Okay, Ben, do you want to start with the next section of yours?
Okay. NRTM mirroring. Is it still the case that people who want to mirror the routing registry need to get in touch with the team and have their source address set up by hand on the firewall, or is that endpoint open for public consumption now?
I don't think it's open. You need to whitelist the IP address.
Okay. So that was the case. All the registries a few years back, and you know, when I set up our mirrors, I had to jump through all of those hoops of, you know, emailing individuals and waiting for responses. most registry operators have now moved away from that model. And I think it would be beneficial for AFRINIC to do so as well. Certainly for the RIPE and the ARIN and the LACNIC databases, you no longer need to get your IP address whitelisted. There's simply a dedicated endpoint that you can send mirroring requests to, and it just works out of the box. And I'd really like to see that become the case in our region as well. That's quite easy to do using IRD version 4, because that can be used in a kind of a proxy mode, so that you're not placing additional strain on the primary application servers. That's certainly how RIPE have done it. I don't think that I think that we should be pushing people to, the more people we can have that have easy local access to that data on net, the easier it becomes for people to build prefix filters from it. And the easier it is to build prefix filters, the more people will have doing the same things in the default free zone. So it's I would strongly encourage you guys to look at doing that. And it's also less firewall rules and emails to manage for you guys. So everybody wins.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for this suggestion. We'll have to analyze this one as well. And can I ask our head of IT to approach you if you know a little bit more about implementations?
Yeah, by all means, that's no problem.
Yeah, I'm sure he has lots of questions. Yes?
Yep, absolutely. And related to that, are you aware of the NRTM version 4 draft that's being adopted in the GROW working group at the IETF? And are you tracking that work?
We are not tracking it yet, but we will now. Right.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah. No, we are not tracking it at the moment, but we will start tracking it. Yeah. Now let's see. We have not really updated our WHOIS core for a very long time. So we have not adopted these new RTM specifications. So yes, we'll have to look into that one as well.
Yeah. So the current mirroring endpoint uses NRTM version 3, I believe. And version 4 is NRTM version 3 isn't really written down anywhere. It was basically implemented separately at RIPE and APNIC about 20 years ago, and nobody bothered to write it down, which is an unfortunate state of affairs. And it's not really fit for purpose. It would be nice to see. Again, this is on the topic of AFRINIC participation at the IETF. It would be nice to see one of you guys actively participating in that, seeing as you're one of the half a dozen organizations in the world that really needs to implement support for that when it becomes a thing.
Sure. Thank you for the heads up.
Okay, I only have 2 questions left. Shall I carry on, or does anyone want to jump in?
I'd say carry on.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was saying I was checking on the Q&A and the mic queue. There's no one, so I believe you can carry on.
Okay, so on the MyAFRINIC updates, first of all, thank you for the invitation to go and look at the new interfaces, and apologies that I haven't really been able to do that. It's been on my list at about number 4 for a really long time, but it's never gone to number 1. There were a couple of things that confused me slightly. You mentioned that the web-based update tooling currently doesn't require the maintainer password, and that's something you're planning to add in order to make sure that the authorization is consistent across the different endpoints, which is sensible. My question was, how are you going to deal with maintainers that have only got PGP or X509 authentication mechanisms and don't have any passwords, are those maintainers going to be unable to use MyAFRINIC, or are you going to deal with that some other way?
So we'll take it into, sorry about that. We'll take it into two phases. In the first phase, will be like for the initial one, we'll be giving the access to all the password authentications for bcrypt and the usual password way. So for the PGP and the X509s, in the very first one, we'll just have to deal with them through the email or the WHOIS web update interface, because that's a very small portion of our members. If I remember correctly, it should be less than 10 members who are impacted by that. And then in the next iteration is where we will include like the PGP part and having them on MyAFRINIC. So we are trying to, with the first version, at least to have a stable environment which is more secure, and it is like reaching out to most members, like more than 90% of the members. And the special cases, or I would say members who have specific requirements or specific ways that they have set up their maintainers or their objects in the past, then we'll be working with them one-to-one to see how we can accommodate those and make it as seamless as possible. So there will be, of course, since the V2 will be like I would say a major overhaul, there will be a period of transition where I believe that we'll rely on your comprehension on some of the, the changes or that period of readaptation and the hiccups that might come up. But after that, we'll reach out on a level where we will be able to go into, like we call it, the faster development and faster implementation for features and requests that comes in as well. So, like the short answer to your question would be like the first version will have the maintainer password side, but the PGP and the X509s will just deal with them on the side as we are going through the implementation.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. Look, for the record, I'm not necessarily suggesting that you need to do that. I think using PGP authentication via a web interface maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. I was just wanting to clarify what the plan was.
Yeah. And then maybe one thing that we did discuss on internally within the team for the PGP authentication, we are able to implement a way of having PGP authentication for our members, but like in the backend in some sense. But then it would mean that we'll have to store the public and the private key on our side, which would be very dangerous.
Yeah.
So this is why on the first, like right now, we don't to really venture into that for now, and we would like to have the member consultations as we are more confident on the way that people would like to deal with the PGP side, because as you would not like to have your private keys being stored by someone else, and something that should be just on your side.
Yeah, I completely agree. There was quite a long discussion during our last meeting a couple of years back about moving away from the password-based authentication mechanisms, and there were a couple of proposals suggested. Has any further work been done in terms of turning that into a concrete action plan, or is that kind of still left where it was after that meeting?
If I remember, I'm not recalling well right now, but I think some of the propositions that we had at that time was the use of RPKI and two-factor authentication, if I remember correctly. Or am I?
I'm terribly sorry. I'm just going to have to mute myself and take a phone call quickly. It looks urgent.
Okay. Or maybe in the meantime, Frank, would you remember about that discussion for moving away from the passwords?
Well, I don't know, Ben expressed all of them, but bcrypt is definitely still alive and well. The other ones, to get rid of them, I think we had a discussion. And there were deadlines that happened, I don't know, before or after that last meeting, but like MD5 and stuff like this can definitely not be created anymore, right?
Apologies for that.
No problem.
Yes. Yes. So we deprecated Bcrypt and MD5 completely from the WHOIS. Only Bcrypt is left.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if Ben, you were referring to this one, or was it like removing the password authentication at all for maintainers? Because this is the one that.
Yeah, so that was certainly the first step. What we discussed was slightly broader than that. And the overall plan was to try and transition from password-based authentication methods to public key-based authentication methods overall. There was quite a long write-up initially written by Simon in the last minutes, which I then edited. And there were quite a lot of unanswered questions. Like, you know, for example, how can we make X509 a little bit more usable by adding support to the web interface and to kind of non-email based mechanisms, working out how we can try and provide tooling to make PGP a little bit less unpleasant to use, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I certainly don't think that it's a fully baked plan yet. What I was asking more is, has there been any additional conversation internally within the staff about what that process looks like, so that we can start talking about a more well-defined proposal? If the answer is no, that's fine. It just probably means that we need to pick up that thread of conversation again and try and push that forward, because I think that's I think it's a worthwhile goal. Sending emails with passwords in it is not typically a great idea.
Yes, in fact, for your question, in fact, Ben, or the comment about that, I would say it's twofold. There is the first side of using PGP, like trying to promote PGP itself on the membership that we, like when we're interacting with people. So we were a bit surprised, like I was mentioning when we were going through, I think when we were just discussing some minutes back, one of the things that surprised us is that we do have some organizations in the region who are members, and quite big members, who have corporate policies of not using PGP on the email. So if someone who is working in that company, who is a network engineer, in order to be able to do the PGP updates, then they'll have to create a local PGP on their, like the terminal, like it's not being used in the email client as such. So it will add some layers of complexity in some ways. And now they will have to use the plain text update. This is something that we have tested and it works. So they will have to sign it and paste it on the plain text update so that they are able to make changes. Yeah, so right here. So this is one of the ways that it can happen, and honestly, it's a bit like an extra layer of complexity for people. The other option that we were talking about is about having the PGP key and in some ways like storing it on our side so that we can make it easier for the members, but it's not really scalable for now, and there are security issues linked to that where we do not want to be storing the private keys. There were some tests that we also did for X509 where someone could have a certificate and they would just basically don't need to provide any passwords when they're accessing MyAFRINIC. There was a proof of concept that we did some time back. But this also, it goes back to the famous issue that we had with BPKI and how it eventually had to be put as optional, where it still doesn't have that, how do we call it, the usability or even the interest of people to make it happen. So we are, honestly speaking, a bit in the middle of a crossroad where we are looking into having the maybe 2FA as a means to have that layer of extra authentication that can happen. So when you're doing changes on your objects, you could just supply the 2FA again to MyAFRINIC. But this again would mean us fiddling with your maintainer, and it also has some security risks associated with that. So I would say it's better to bring it back to the drawing board and we try to discuss and see what most people would like to see and what is usable as well, so that the final solution that we will be implementing will have also a broader audience and usability of the Lambda tech guy, I would say. So someone who will deal with AFRINIC mainly just to create the objects, and they want to have it done easy, so quick and easy, for example.
Yep.
So
I,
on this one, in fact, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Both PGP and X509 have significant usability drawbacks at the moment. It would be, I think that improving X509 support is probably fairly easy. There are a couple of places where it can't be used at the moment. For example, in the web update tool, because it relies on. So the problem with the X509 support is it's not really X509 support. It's actually CMS support, and as a result, if you don't have email headers to stick certain pieces of metadata into, you can't actually use it properly. And so I think re-looking at how X509 authentication in the context of WHOIS updates is a good idea. Yeah. Mostly, I think this is probably a tooling problem. There's no reason that, for example, one needs to use their normal kind of email client in order to send a PGP signed email, right? It's just SMTP. But doing that by hand on the command line today is not for the faint-hearted. It's perfectly doable, and we have in-house tooling which does exactly that for WHOIS updates. But it's all a mixture of bash and a bit of Perl and various bits and pieces of nastiness that is not really fit for public consumption. I think having this, I think dealing with this problem needs to involve at least some, it needs to involve a solution to the tooling problem. And whether that is, kind of a joint development exercise between AFRINIC and members of the community to make better client-side tools available, or to kind of relook at that infrastructure entirely in the context of the IETF to work out a better client interface that can be deployed more widely. The issue is not so much on the server side interface, but more on the fact that it's not reasonable to expect a large proportion of the membership today to use the tools that exist, because they're fucking awful.
So in fact, on that note, it reminds me of an interaction that I had with one member. I think it was last year around the time that we had the release candidate out. So we had a very interesting and long discussion with this specific member, who was also talking about like what you're saying, for having like some scripts or some ways of doing things internally at your end. And the person was basically telling us that he has a sort of PHP-based IP plan that he's using. So it just builds up the objects for him, and he goes on the WHOIS interface just to send it, or uses the AutoDBM to send it to AFRINIC for the updates. So one of the things that he was mentioning about was, if we had this WHOIS API that Yogesh is projecting on the screen, it might be easier to have like such tools where they just connect to the WHOIS, and like the WHOIS interface itself could also be the one to update like the routing registry port as well. So the chart looks like basically. So one of the things that I was proposing to the person was maybe we could have a joint project to have like co-creation with the community, where if you have tools or scripts that you're using as hacks right now, we could have like collaboration with other people in the community and AFRINIC stuff to make it in a solution that is not like a hack as such, but in a working solution where people can just adopt it and they use it. So it's a sort of open source, if I can call it, solutions that we can propose then to the general community that is not only being developed by AFRINIC staff, but it's the community as well, they have a hand in that. So people who are well versed with PHP, like for the front end, or if they have like any fancy ways of doing things, we just put them together and then we have a working solution. So then after that, we could just have that specific solution being connected to the WHOIS or any internal service where that open source tool, if I can call it, will just push the data and we ensure that we are receiving it in a format that is acceptable, and the general like Lambda tech again will just have to use that tool and they just throw in whatever they want to throw on that form, and it will be easier for them as well to maintain or work on it. And in the long term, we see that this is working, and we could also look into how to have it into MyAFRINIC maybe as well, in like a very long-term projection I'm talking here. So in the first version will be just to have that tool working a bit independently, but connecting to the APIs that we will have. But in the long term, seeing how we can also incorporate it in the MyAFRINIC, for example.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's kind of what I've got in mind as well. The tricky thing, the tricky thing is you don't want to break the RPSL authentication model in the process. That's the fundamental problem with what RIPE has done, where they have basically cooked their internal SSO mechanism into the maintainer authentication mechanism, and as a result have completely broken compatibility with everyone else on the internet. I don't think we want to go. I think we need to avoid going through that route, going down that route. But I don't think that there's any reason that we can that we need to break that compatibility. But I think what it does mean is that this shouldn't purely be an AFRINIC thing. I think what we need is a sane way of doing this, which is supported by most, if not all, of the RIRs, so that we don't have to have, I mean, the WHOIS command line tool is a good example of what happens if all of the WHOIS services are subtly different. And you end up with lines and lines and lines of if statements trying to work out which server you're connecting to. We don't want that on the update side as well.
Yes.
So I've written several of the building blocks that could be used to do a kind of a proof of concept version of such a tool. So maybe we should schedule a follow-up session to talk about ideas for how we get that done in practice.
Yeah. So maybe we could reach out to the working groups on the DP working group to see if there are more people who have such. I think at some point there was someone who had posted some of the scripts that they're using, if I remember correctly. And then I think it was Ronald in 2021. There were some tools that he had posted. So we could try to regroup these types of scripts and tools. And also that person that I was telling you about, we could have a session together with other parties interested to discuss on how we can put our minds together to have something working.
Yeah, so if that person you're referring to is who I'm guessing it is, then the author, the original author of the software that they use is actually quite a close friend of mine, so I can involve that person as well, if that would be helpful.
Okay, Ben.
Okay. Okay. My last one before, because we're running out of time. In fact, if anyone else wants to use the last 5 minutes, they're welcome to, because I've had almost all the microphone time so far.
So I don't see any questions on the Q&A. Is there anyone who would like to use the mic? I see Frank.
Just in preparation, I have one small thing. It might even be the same that Ben wants to ask. So Ben, you say yours.
You go first. I'll tell you if it's the same.
During the last week or so in RIPE, they brought up the issue of making potentially the phone attribute of the person object optional instead of mandatory. I wondered if we could look into this as well. It's a completely new topic. And it can also be discussed on mailing lists. So we don't need to spend time on it now. But if anybody has anything to say about this, but Ben mentioned yours.
So
Okay.
let me comment on your one first. It is a good idea in theory. It is not a good idea in practice. The reason that it's not a good idea in practice is because, unlike the allocations object, the person object is actually defined in an RFC, and there is nowhere in the IETF at the moment to update that RFC. And we already have there are already several examples where the RIPE implementation deviates from the RPSL RFCs. And speaking as someone who has implemented the RPSL RFCs, that makes life hell. And we shouldn't do more of that unless we do it through the standards process.
Understood.
I'm trying to, for what it's worth, I'm trying to convince the GROW working group chairs that RPSL changes should live in the GROW working group. And if I convince them that that's the case, then we can maybe start doing it by writing an internet draft that does that. But I don't believe that that's the kind of change that the RILs should be making on their own.
Okay.
Okay, my last one was that it's kind of two, but they're similar. In the way that the permissions work on MyAFRINIC today, version 1, is kind of tightly coupled in a weird way to the admin C and the tech C attributes in the ordnum object. So if you go and add a contact in MyAFRINIC as a tech contact, that winds up being published in the ordnum in the tech C, and the same for the admin C. And it kind of overwrites whatever data was in the object previously. That is very unexpected and broken behavior. And I find myself on a semi-regular basis needing to go in and manually update the ordnum to remove that noise. It would be really nice if that wasn't the case. And more generally, I don't know if any other members feel the same way, but I really need to be able to change the data in our ordnum. The only thing that members shouldn't have the ability to change in the ordnum object is the organization. Everything else should be writable by the maintainer of the ordnum, and it's not currently, and it causes operational problems. So that's my feature request for the WHOIS side of things for today.
I think for the contact side, so when you're making like maybe contact updates or changes to the organization, so going back to the actual resources, it's usually the host masters who will have to update it. So they will usually reach out to confirm like what is the remaining or the final list of contacts that you would like to see rather on the different objects, V4, V6, and the ASN. So there might be maybe a miscommunication on this side. Like when we tell you, for example, like BM10-AFRINIC, for example. I'm not sure if it's your nick handle, but I'm just taking an example here. And FH5-AFRINIC have to be the final contacts on the objects. So we'll only use these two as contacts and override everything else to remove like redundant contacts and redundant information of previous people who have been there. So maybe we have just to fine-tune a bit on the way that we are asking for that confirmation. Maybe it's a bit confusing. And to come to your comment about the updates on the OTNUM, there was a limitation some time back that the maintainer, so the MNT lower as it was called before, but it has been replaced mainly by the MNT root, was not able to make changes to the policies and the different like import, export, etc. So we did have an update that was done on those rules. So maybe we just need to make some tests to confirm if the MNT root is also inheriting those like the privileges to make the updates, because we have deprecated the MNT lower on OTNUM since it didn't make sense, as we don't have like child objects really for OTNUM compared to V4 and V6. So I believe that maybe there's just a confirmation to be done on the MNT root and the MNT lower if the behavior is still the same or there has been a gap there.
Okay, so that, yeah, I think you're correct. I hadn't realized that you had deprecated main lower. That sounds really broken to me. So I remember the changes that you're talking about for the import and export attributes. And that was actually triggered by a similar conversation I had years back with Madhvi. So there are a few issues. So main by, main lower, and main roots are fundamentally different things that give you access to different things. Main lower is for hierarchically named objects. So like if I'm main lower for AS37271, then that means that I can create an AS set called AS37271 : AS_foo. Yeah. Whereas main roots appears on either an ORtNum or a INetNum, and that allows creation of a root or root 6 object with an origin of that ORtNum or with or coming from that net block. And so they're orthogonal to each other. They both need to be there. If you've removed main lower, then that's a bit of a problem. I wasn't previously aware of that, but that's going to be that's going to cause issues when people. So these issues are the reasons why Work Online hasn't been able to migrate from RADB to the AFRINIC WHOIS.
In fact,
the solution to this should be that the org field of the ORtNum can only be changed by the main lower of the AS block that the ORtNum comes from. Yes. And everything else, and the actual resource holder should be main by of the ORtNum itself. At the moment, main by of an ORtNum is the host master, which is it's just broken.
Yeah, in fact, I was just checking on the WHOIS as we speak. So the MNT lower is no longer, so it's still on the WHOIS, but it's no longer being used as previously where we were populating it consistently for all members. Since the MNT lower on the WHOIS side, it doesn't really have that relationship that you mentioned with ASset, because right now someone can create an ASset with a maintainer which is completely different from the ASN. There's no like really a relationship as such between the ASset and the actual ASN.
So there is supposed to be, if you're using the colon separated names, the hierarchical names, That's
Yes.
what main lower. That's what main lower is for. Now I know a lot of people don't create their AS sets that way, but if you do, that's the reason that is recommended, is because it inherits. There is an additional kind of layer of authentication there, so you can't create objects in someone else's hierarchy. Perhaps this is a longer conversation, and one that we should switch to either the mailing list or a direct conversation.
Yes, yes. Indeed, when you're talking about the hierarchy, I remember that there, if you know one of the host masters, at some point we were running some tests for that hierarchy for ASL, but it didn't really move a lot. So I believe that we'll have to move into a separate discussion, as you mentioned. It's going to be a longer discussion to really try and readjust or redefine the rules for that. Because it's there was some improvements that we made for the MNT routes to allow members to make changes, but I believe we'll have to go back and see exactly what's happening on that.
Yep, cool. Let's do that, because it would be nice to. That's been broken for a long time now. It would be nice to get that fixed.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you. There are no other points. Maybe it would be wise to end this session now and do follow-up sessions, the remaining items. Right?
Yep, I think so. Is someone on the staff planning to do a first draft of the minutes?
Yes, I will find someone who will draft the minutes and then share it with you people, and then we post it on the on the GitHub.
That would be great.
Yes. Thank you very much. So Frank, it's fine. We can close.
Yes.
All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for your active participation. I think we discussed about a lot of topics which I've never seen on the other RIR mailing list. So it's quite interesting. And so we are keeping our discussions local, and that's actually gives the merit of the database working group. So on these notes, I would like to bid you farewell, and please enjoy the rest of the AFRINIC Internet Summit. Lots of meetings this week are online. So, and then the real thing, unfortunately, no one is in Mauritius from this group, I guess. And so it's going to be in a hybrid format. Some people will be in attendance in Mauritius, and most people will probably be attending online. And all the facilities. So this was like a first session. I think this is the first one. Yeah.
We're going to call it was the AIS kickoff.
Yeah, it was the kickoff. Thank you very much, and I will see you later, people. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.